I'm excited to be back here with you. It's been a minute since I've been able to speak with you, and I hope what I have for you tonight will excite you, will encourage you, will challenge you, and will actually push you to start using a little bit more riskier behavior. And I know that may not be the fruit of most youth conferences. That's what you want. You may not want someone to be risky, but I believe pretty much anything that happens for the kingdom of God that is big comes out of somebody living a risky life, a life that is full of challenges overcome. And I want you guys to focus in the right direction in your life. But tonight I want to start off really quick with a simple question. How many of you in here have ever heard of the game? And I've already got mixed results on this so far. How many of you guys have heard of the game, the Oregon Trail? 1, 2, all right, so a few of you guys. Super old game, right? Super old. It's like 1970s, long before I was ever thought of, so it's definitely a retro era game. And in that game, you play a wagon leader in 1848, and you have to choose from the beginning what you're going to do, who you are. You choose your character. What? Okay, see, I thought you wanted to teach something. So, you have to choose your character, and then you have to choose your companions, and then you get to choose what season you're going to start out in. And then from that point, you have about $400. You go to Matt's General Store, and you have to decide how to split up the money that you have to start out in your little trail, your life, as you move westward. If you don't know what the Oregon Trail is, it's a real thing. It was a period of time of expansion to the west, and people went out there and did all kinds of stuff and explored and found, where California was and all that kind of stuff. So, but you have to decide how you're going to do that and how you're going to do that successfully. So you go to the store, you're going to buy guns, you can buy ammo, you can buy clothing. What kind of clothing are you going to buy? You're going to buy food. And you have to figure out how many oxen you want. Otherwise, you might be just, pulling the wagon yourself across the plains of the West. But the most famous parts of the game with how many ways that you could die. That's what everybody remembers about it. You can die from this and that, and diseases and bandits and, stampedes and break a leg and drown in the river. And there's all these things that come up as you're going through the game. And the game was developed by the Minnesota Educational Computer Consortium, or MEC. And its purpose was to teach young people what it took to be a pioneer. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, is how to be a pioneer. And a pioneer, simply put, is someone who goes on before others to clear the way, to take away obstacles and obstructions, map out the trail, and prepare the way for others to follow later on. The intro of the second version of this game said something along these lines. It said, thousands of people are looking west to build better lives for themselves and their families. People from all walks of life are selling nearly everything they own and loading their remaining possessions into small covered wagons. They're leaving friends and relatives behind and headed across the plains to Oregon. It's not an easy journey. It's full of challenges and dangers, disease, deserts, buffalo stampedes, steep hills, and treacherous rivers. And it ends like this. It says, many do not succeed, but for those who do, the rewards are great adventure and opportunity. And in real life, that actually happened in the mid-1800s. As I said, people, normal, everyday, regular people, overnight became pioneers in search of fame, fortune, and a better life for their family across the plains. And they wanted that adventure that was out there. But let me ask you another thing. Immediately, what comes to mind when I say the word adventure? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Anyone? Adventure. Indiana Jones. Yeah, that's a good one. Indiana Jones is a good thing right there. What, though, do you usually use the word adventure positively or negatively? Positively, right? It's usually something exciting. Generally, we use it about something we haven't experienced yet, but we're hoping to experience it soon. We're looking forward to it. It's why you do things like bungee jump, or you jump out of planes and parachute, or you take roller coasters that look like you're going to die on it. Or you may do other things that are dangerous in your life. You're seeking adventure, and you're seeking that excitement that's there. But the actual definition of adventure is this. It simply means risk, or hazard, or danger, or chance. It's an unusual but an exciting but typically dangerous experience or activity. And one of my personal philosophies, as you grow up, you begin to develop personal philosophies, way that you decide certain things, the way that you lead your life. As you grow up, as you read the Word and you experience your life, you have certain things and sayings that you keep in your mind that help you when you come up to decision-making time. And one of those in my life is that adventure is risk, but that is where the stories come from. And you guys know that every story you've ever heard or watched on TV, the best ones always have the most circumstances of risk and danger involved in it, and the person is struggling and they're fighting, and sometimes they get knocked down over and over again and they just can't seem to get there, but in the end they come out victorious. That's what adventure is. And me personally, I want to be known when I'm dead and gone and I'm like a tombstone on the side of the trail as you guys kind of drive by and wave. You know, when that tombstone is there, I don't want it to say anything about me being fearful or timid or weak. I want it to say something about I never back down from a chance for adventure, for risk, or an opportunity to do something extraordinary. I don't want my life to be ordinary. And that is the attitude of a pioneer. Against all odds, we're just going to go all in and risk it all for the chance, not the guarantee, but just the shot that somehow, possibly, I could achieve something that no one else has done yet. I can see something no one else has ever seen. I can do something that no one else has ever done. Years ago, I heard this statement from another youth speaker. He was probably my age then. But I took my youth group to a church in Jacksonville, Florida, and we went and heard him. And he said that if we expect our young people to start pursuing Jesus in real life, that we need to stop sugarcoating the challenges and the risks and start challenging them with the difficulties of that life. Because I know that you love to face difficulties. If you play sports, you are facing difficulties. If you go to the gym, you face difficulties. If you are trying to compete in any arena, whether mentally or physically, you do it because there's something there inside of you that wants to reach beyond who you were today and to beat maybe someone else and to accomplish something that no one else can accomplish. When you're a winner, when you're in first place, you're seeking a place that no one else can get to but you. And that should be what your spirit and what your mind is when it comes to the things of God as well. Because if you're not willing to take risks, to step out when no one else will, then you don't deserve the rewards that come from being a pioneer. And sure, following after Christ in the life of the adventure of pioneering into your Christian life is an awesome life. And there's nothing like it. And you will meet people you never would have met other times, and you're going to experience things that are great, and you'll have huge mountaintops. But remember that a life following after Christ is always going to be balanced off with the same amount of danger and risk, just because that is how it is. The Christian life is not made for wimps. It's made for people who are strong, who have grit, determination, and resilience. And that's what our lives are going to be determined by. The success or failure of your life will be determined on whether you accept those realities. Even in the normal world, okay? Even in the normal world, they have their own pioneers of technology, of events and different things. Even in the real world, they will tell you that if you want to succeed in business in any place, anywhere, you need the same things: determination, grit, and resilience. Add to that fact that we as Christians have a new birth, a new mind, a new purpose, a new direction, all of which go against the natural world around us. That makes it much more difficult, much more risky than even what the world tries to achieve. People like Elon Musk and the guy who runs Amazon, Bezos, they at times in the past risked it all. If you read the story of Elon Musk, there was a point in time where he had almost nothing left, relatively speaking, in his terms, and he bet it all. And he said, I didn't know if it was going to work. He said it was better, though, to try than it was to just walk away and leave it. And that was when he was deciding whether he would have Tesla or SpaceX, and he said, I'm just going to try for both. I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to see what happens. He said it was better to do that than it was to walk away in fear of what may not happen. And as Paul said in the Word, he says they do these things for corruptible crowns or corruptible trophies or things that won't last forever. And so I believe that as Christians, we ought to be more than willing to risk things the same exact way, even more so, for things that are eternal, that will not pass away, that are not corruptible, things that we can keep for all eternity. And so, yes, there's danger, there's risk, there's parts of that. But how boring would it be for you to have it said about you when you die that the only thing you accomplished was that you were born, you somehow survived, how many years, and then you died. And that was it. And you passed through a world in such a way that you left no monument, no memory, and no impact on the people you shared this world with for the time that you were here. How bad would it be to show up at the throne of Christ, who went through all the things he did, walked the hill of Calvary in his own trail and journey as he suffered those things, and say, all I have to show you for my salvation, for the life that you purchased back from the dead, is nothing. It's a normal, ordinary, empty life where I did nothing but think about today, and I never thought about eternity. I never thought about tomorrow. I never took a risk. I never set out as a pioneer. Because what I want in here is for each and every one of you to have something to be said for when your life is over. I want Jake Gerlamatos, is that how I say it right? That's it? It's completely wrong, right? Jake G, I want him to be known and remembered in his life as a man who had a beautiful wife and a great family, and I became a sports star or a business owner or whatever it is he ends up doing in his life, that he did it to the best of his ability, that he went beyond, that his community knows his name. I want there to be a plaque somewhere that Madison Owen or whatever your last name will end up being, in the future, that here at this spot, Madison accomplished ... And for every one of you, whether the world puts up a memory of you or a monument of you or not, that when you do stand before Christ at the end of time, that there are monuments behind you of things that you accomplished because you took risks in your life to just do what God called you to do rather than playing it safe. And we all want that kind of life, the life that can be remembered, but we're not all willing to take the risks that it takes to get there. And through the few opportunities I've had to speak to you over the last year, we've talked about a lot of things. How many of you guys remember one of the messages I preached? I've done a lot of how-to messages. You guys remember one? What? How to build a campfire. He took that one. All right, that's one of them. What's another one? How to what? We did a skit up here, and one of them was falling and running a tent. Huh? No, that was a different one. That was like a random one-off in that one. No, that was a different one. How to avoid bear attack, or how to prevent bear attacks, how to avoid traps, how to build your cabin, and how to build a campfire, right? And a kind of other things, but all these themes would run into this one message I'm preaching about tonight, because all four of those assume that you are already pursuing God in a pioneer-style life, that you are leaving behind things that you were once connected to and pursuing things that God has given you in front of you. And so we want to do that. And as a guy who used to sit in your seat and think that all this kind of stuff I'm doing today is crazy, and now I'm 20 years-ish later on the other side after finally giving in to God and doing what he wanted me to do, I could tell you that my life since then has been anything but ordinary. And really, ordinary ought to be the enemy in your life. You do not want to be that person who at the end was just an ordinary, regular person who never accomplished anything. And it has nothing to do with being in ministry. If you're called to ministry, you need to give into that right now and just start pursuing it, because it'll be the best thing that you've ever done. But if you're not called to ministry and God wants you to be a business owner or an entrepreneur or a billionaire or an astronaut or a doctor or whatever else it might be, that is what you should pursue. But every single Christian life is called by God to pursue him wholly, and a life lived to fulfill that calling is the most adventurous, i.e. risky and exciting life that you can possibly have. And I want you to see the two sides, that the way that God has taken at least me in my life since I said, you know what, I will do what you're asking me to do, has been a life that I would never go back on if you gave me 100 opportunities. Because what I have accomplished and things I've seen and the things I've experienced were things I never would have thought about when I was your age sitting there. You cannot actually see what God's going to do But you can see today in the choice you have before you, and that's to start taking risks in what God has called you into. Go to Acts chapter 7, verse 1. We're going to look here really quick. Because tonight I want to talk about being a pioneer, about being a follower of Christ who leads a risky, exciting life that leaves an impact on the generations that come after it. A life that is not based on what everybody else around you is doing, but based on the truth of God's word in a spirit of grit, determination, and resilience. So look at Acts chapter 7, verses 1 through 4. And we're going to kind of jump into the middle of a story here. I'll give you some context, and we'll get some points, and we'll work on our way from here. So Acts chapter 7, verses 1 through 4 says this, "Then said the high priest, 'Are these things so?' And he said," and we'll find out who this is in a second, "Men and brethren and fathers, hearken," or listen. "The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia and dwelt in Haran. And he said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and come into the land which I shall show you," or thee. "And then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran," or in the Old Testament would be Haran. "And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him from this land wherein you now dwell." The context, if you've been in my Sunday school class lately, you know that we've been talking all about context and how to study your Bible. And the context is the story surrounding what we're reading. And this is about Stephen, who is the first deacon of the first church in Jerusalem. He is out there in the streets. He is preaching his heart out, taking the risk, doing what God's called him to do. And there are some people in the crowd who hate it. And so they make up some false charges. They drag him before the court. And that's where we step into the story. They have dragged him before the court of the Jews called the Sanhedrin, and they are testing him and they're throwing false accusations at him, just like they did for Jesus before Pilate. The same story is repeating itself in Stephen's life. He is laying his life on the line for Christ, and they are dragging him up on false charges for that. And when the priest here in verse 1 asks him, "Are these things that they're talking about, they're saying about you, true?" he did not cower on his knees and beg for his life. Rather, he takes the riskier option and preaches the gospel of Jesus to the face of the entire council, which he knows, most likely, will end his life that day. And yet he chooses the riskier option. He starts by recounting the story of Abraham, the pioneer of our faith. And in his message, we find three things, and we're going to focus on Abraham, and we'll end with Stephen in a second. Three things in the story of Abraham that not only made him live a life of adventure and risk, but also leave an eternal impact on the world around him. Number one, what do you need to be a pioneer? How do you do it? You must have vision. Notice verse 2, it says, "The God of glory appeared unto him." Now, God had made an actual appearance unto Abraham here, a literal vision. Abraham saw this. But God does not speak with us today in the same way. Hebrews chapter 1 tells us that he used to speak to us through prophets and visions in different times in different ways. But now in these last times, he speaks to us through his son. And in chapter 2 says also through them who heard him, i.e. the apostles. And so what you get from that is that the way God speaks to us today is through his word, which is why it's so important that you read the Bible. Because that is the way that God directs you and that God will speak to you in your life. So what does it look like then for me to have vision today? If it's not like what Abraham had, what do I need today? Well, I would define vision as this: the ability to see past, or the ability to see the invisible while looking beyond the visible. The ability to see the invisible while looking beyond the visible. And I'm going to tell you why. Because Abraham, even though he had a vision from God, still needed the kind of vision I'm talking to you about today. Just because God had met with Abraham visually does not mean that he knew exactly what was going on or even where he was going. If you remember in January, Pastor Nathan talked about this in our By Faith series. In Hebrews chapter 11, it says that by faith, when God had spoken this to him, by faith, Abraham obeyed. He went out not knowing where he went. And then Genesis chapter 12 tells us that he was 75 years old when he got this command. So not only does he not know where he's going, he's also to an age where this should be an impossibility for him to do. And so for him to look past, what does he need to look beyond as we define vision to be? He needs to look beyond his own knowledge, his own skill, his own age, his own ability, beyond the mountains and the deserts that surround him, past the fertile plains of Ur and Haran where he lived for so long, past the places that are familiar to him. He must look past the guarantee of safety if he hopes to receive the reward that God had promised him, the reward of a pioneer. He must look past where he is today. He was in Ur, which is a rich place. Ur was one of the most advanced places on earth at that time. He had everything he needed there, but the people of Ur who knew about God had decided they did not want to worship God, and Abraham and his family were the last few remnants who actually believed in the God, essentially at this time, of Noah, and that's who they were closest to in our storyline. Okay, and so they leave Ur because God has told them to go out, and they stop in this place called Haran here first. But then at a point, God is moving him even farther to the land that we know today as Israel. But Abraham, like us, needs to look past and beyond the things that surround him to be able to see what God is calling him to do. Even though God had given him a physical vision, he still needed to be able to follow through, and that took the kind of vision we're talking about today, to see past difficulties, problems, and issues. God, knowing what God is asking you to do at this moment does not remove the difficulty of doing it. Just because you know what to do, when you begin to pray and you begin to seek God's face and he begins to show you what to do, just because you know that and you start to figure it out does not mean that doing it is going to be any easier. Abraham still had to head out into the wilderness, not knowing where he's going, seeing something that was invisible. As Hebrews says, he looked for a city whose builder and maker was God, but he had never seen it, not until he passed on. And now I want to just use this as an example. I'll be 37 next Tuesday, which makes, as I said, about 20 years from the time when I finally surrendered my life to do what God had called me to do, to the time that I knew what God wanted me to do and to follow him beyond my own plans. And much like some of you, I sat in your seats and I had my own plans, and basically all it really entailed was making a lot of money and having a lot of cars and having a big garage to put them all in. That was the extent of what I wanted to do in my life. I didn't know how I was going to make money. That's all I just did. I just knew I was going to do that. I was going to start a company of some sort. It's going to make money. That said, in my head at the time, whoever my wife is in the future, if she wants whatever the house she wants, I'll build that house. I don't care. I just want a giant garage with all the cars and trucks that I built in it. That's what I wanted. And as God began to pry my hands off of those pursuits that I had begun, I began to bargain with God. And I began to say, look, if you just let me do what I want, I'll give a bunch of money to other people, and they can go preach, and they can go become missionaries, and they can go do all that crazy stuff. Not me. I don't want to have to go and actually do that. And when there was a pastor who told me that I was going to preach one day, I looked at him, I said, you are crazy. I don't want anything to do with that life. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm tired of it. A lot of it stemmed from a lot of the preacher boys I grew up with, and I knew them personally, and I knew who they really were, and I knew who they were at church, and I knew who they were at the mall and everywhere else that we ended up. And I hated that way. I hated that life, and I figured if that was how preachers were, that I didn't want anything to do with that. I want nothing to do with being a double-minded type of a person. But God had other plans, and he began to pry my hands off of it. And when I finally surrendered, though, at age 19, so about 2 years or so later, I still had miles and miles, physically, spiritually, mentally, in every way you can possibly think, to go before I would get to where I'm going. I today am miles and miles away from where I was at that point, and I had no clue about any of the things that would happen to me along the way. All I needed, but what I had to do was be able to trust that the things I couldn't see, that God would do something with that and that I just needed to follow today. However, as I didn't know what it was going to look like, I didn't know where I'd end up, I certainly didn't know who I was going to marry at the time, and I didn't know what jobs I would have, I didn't know how this whole ministry thing would even come. But I remember standing in the dirt driveway in Roebuck, South Carolina, which you guys have probably never heard of. And I stood in the dirt driveway and I would watch those purple South Carolina sunsets over the trees just on the other side of the railroad tracks that were right in front of my house that the train went through in the middle of the night every week, and woke everybody up. And sitting here, I'm dirt poor. I have nothing to offer God myself. But as I moved forward, I would look and I would stand there at nights and I would look over there and I'd watch the jet trails gleam in the sunset, and I would visualize, I would know that one day I'll be past those trees, that I will no longer be the place I'm standing at today, that God would do something. And I didn't know what it would be like, but I knew that I wanted to be wherever it was that God wanted me to be. And you have to be able to see past your present circumstances. Because here's what happens. To have vision, you don't just need to be able to see that God has a future, but you also need to be able to see beyond the trees, the obstacles that are around you today, because that's what vision is. It's not just the ability to see, but the ability to see beyond the things that would hinder you, your home, your history, and your heritage, and believe that God rewards those who diligently seek Him. Because this is what happens when we don't decisively follow after God. And that's number 2. Number 1, you need to have vision, be able to see beyond the circumstances that are around you and see where God wants you to go, if even only in a few steps ahead. You need to follow through. But number 2, to do that, you must be decisive. Number 2, a pioneer must be decisive. Notice verse 3, God tells Abraham to get out of your country and from your kindred. His country was those circumstances we just talked about seeing past. But notice how deceitful our hearts become. If we are poor or we're less skilled or somewhat handicapped, what we will say is that I can't do anything for God because I have nothing to offer. But if we're rich and we're skilled and we have something good going on where we're at, we'll say, I can't serve God because I have too much to lose. And in every case, you may look at people and you may think, well, they have more to offer. They might do this. But whatever God's calling you to do, you must decisively leave behind you the familiarity of the surroundings that you are in today. Whatever it is, if it's poverty, if it's poor, if it's a lack of understanding, if you're not as skilled or as knowledgeable as other people, if God's calling you, believe me, I am the last person that someone would pick to be on their team 100% when I was younger. I'm the last person that I would ever have thought to do the things that I have pursued in my life. And yet I stand here because God is the one who picked me up and took me where I needed to go. But God is calling you to make a decisive change in your life. He not only called Abraham out of his familiar surroundings, but he also called him away from his familiar community. And if you were to be honest with you, and you would have to say that most of the people you hang out with every week probably have no real plan for what they're going to do with their future. They have no vision, they have no plans, they have no identity outside of the jokes they tell, the sports they play, the drugs they do, the apps they use, the boy or girl they date, and that's it. That's who they are. They have never thought about what happens the day I graduate. Where am I going right now, 10 years from now, when you're 25, 26, 27, 28? What do you hope to have accomplished by that time? Where do you hope to be? And I'm not talking about trying to pick a career choice right now. Do you want to be someone who has lived a life 10 years from now that has accomplished great things within the realm of what God has for you to do? Or do you want to be someone who's known for holding back and saying, that's just not for me. It's just too dangerous. It's just too risky. It's just too costly. I don't want to do that. I don't want to give up my rights. I don't want to give up my direction. I just want to float through like everybody else is doing. And that's the easy choice. That's the easy way to do it. And yet God calls us, as he called Abraham, to something risky, something dangerous, something he couldn't fully see. Because a pioneer is a person who looks into the wilderness, sees all that can be, and chooses to leave behind the safety of the town, of the familiar, of the comfortable, for nothing more than the chance to risk it all for the reward of something better. Even if their friends and families are telling them, "Why are you serving God? That's lame. That's stupid. No one does that anymore. Why would you give up everything? Why would you preach? Why would you go to the mission field? Why would you run a godly business? Why don't you, and you get older, you're going to understand what I'm saying here. Like, why don't you run a godly business? Why don't you, oversell and underserve and steal from your customers like everybody else do? Why don't you do things the way we do them? Why do you serve God? Why do you give to that church? You have so much more money if you just didn't give. Why do you do the things you do?" And this pioneer will always turn a deaf ear and say, "Yes, there's risk. Yes, there's danger. Yeah, there's a possibility I might die out there, but it's better than sitting here. Because there's freedom out there. There's liberty out there. There's a purpose out there. There's something to be done, and there's a reward to be won." Abraham's home in Ur and Haran, as I said, they knew who God was, but history tells us they chose not to believe. They chose to reject God. They chose the short-sighted, lesser visions of pleasure today over the rewards of risk that come tomorrow. And Abraham saw more. He wanted more. He asked God for more, and he received more because when God said leave, he decisively picked up his tents and just left, even though he didn't know where he was going, even though the journey would cost him greatly. Number 3, you must show resilience. You must have vision, and you must be decisive in what you choose to do, but you must also show resilience. Resilience, the word itself simply means to be able to bounce back. It's the qualities of a good spring. When you smush it down and you let it go, it pops off, it rebounds. What it means in the philosophical sense, I guess, is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. Not everything will go how you plan it. Believe me, there is not a single thing that I have thought about in the past, over the past 20 years, where I am today that would have got me to where I am today. Today is not what I had planned at all. This is not how I planned things to work out. And I still have plenty of questions, and I still have trees to look past and obstacles I need to be able to have faith enough to say, you know what, this is in my way today, but I don't believe it'll be in my way always. And if I need to climb over it, I will. Wherever God is leading, that's where I'm going to go. And that's the kind of spirit you have to have, that even when you're hit with problems, with issues, with losses, with things that you wish just didn't happen, you still have to continue. Notice in verse 4, it says, when his father was dead. As great as life as I lead today, it is not without its pains and losses, and anyone following after Christ will tell you the same thing. In the middle of the journey into the wilderness of the unknown, Abraham loses his father Terah, just as he had lost earlier his brother Haran when they're in the land of Ur still. I'm telling you that one of the worst things, there's a lot of pitfalls and problems in life, but even besides just the threats that come in from the outside, some of the worst things that you'll face when you pursue God, and some of you will understand this and some of you won't. It's not just the bears, the predator, the circumstances that happen to us. It's not just the traps the devil's setting. It's not just the temptations that are here, there, and everywhere. But sometimes the worst thing is the long periods of waiting. Because no pioneer gets to his destination overnight. And when you get to your destination, there are long days of work ahead of you. When the people who headed out west way back then, they got out there and there was nothing for them. It was bare land, and with their bare hands and an axe and probably a two-headed whipsaw, they went to work and they built their cabins and they built their fires and they made sure they were protected from the predators that were around them, and they stayed out of the pitfalls and the things that were out there. It was long nights of waiting to get there, long nights of waiting to get things done at the house. Some of the most difficult things you'll do in your life is you surrender, you start to move, you start to do, you start to experience, and all of a sudden you hit a spot of time in your life, and as I said, you won't understand a lot of this now, but you will later. You'll hit a period of your life and you're just sitting there and you're just waiting. And the grind of everyday, monotonous life tries to say, why did I even choose to do this? I don't want to be here doing what I'm doing today. It's a grind, it's this, it's that, or it's whatever it might be. And you have to remember that Abraham was promised a son at age 75, and he didn't get it until he was 100. That's 25 years later. He's also promised a land, and that promise he never saw in his life. He saw the land, but he didn't receive it as a reality. He is still right now in heaven waiting resurrection so he can step his foot on the land where it's possessed by his ancestors as God promised him. That's something we don't ever think about. Waiting 25 years is one thing. Waiting thousands of years and having to be resurrected to experience that. Job tells us in his recount, he says, look, I know that when my Redeemer stands on the earth, I will see him in my body. Speaking of the resurrection. And Abraham had that same hope. That even though he died without actually receiving the promise that he looked and saw ahead of time, that somewhere down the line he would get it, even if it was through death. And that's why he had the faith later to sacrifice Isaac, Hebrew tells us, because he said, if I don't get it now, I know God will do something because God cannot lie and the vision will be a reality. As exciting as the life of following after Christ is, it is not without its dangers, its risks. And yes, it is safer to just do what everybody else does. It's easier. It will be super easy if you just put it in neutral, coast down the hill, and you're just flown along with everybody else. It will always be easier to just do what everybody else does. But that is not a life worthy, one, of the blood that bought us. And it's definitely not a life worth remembering. I'm going to ask Josh to come to the piano. If you choose the life, you have to choose what you want it to look like. If you choose a pioneer life, you must have the vision to see past the visible obstacles and see the invisible possibilities. Decisively leaving behind your own faults and failures, not recognizing those as problems, that God will help you through those. Leaving behind anybody who holds you back, anything that holds you back, and decisively saying, no matter what it takes, I'm going into the wilderness and I know God will meet me there. If you read those verses, he says, he tells him to leave where he is and come to the land. Now, if I say go, that means you're going which way? Away from me, right? But when I say come to me, where am I at? I'm in the destination that you're going to. God was already waiting for him in the wilderness, in the place he couldn't see. Abraham, though he didn't know where he was going, knew who was where he was going. He knew it was God. He knew he was out there. He knew he had promised. He knew he was true. And you must show resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And I'm going to finish with this. We're late. I'm going to finish with this. Number 4. It really wasn't in the points I added earlier, but I want you to know this. Because if you do all these things, you have the vision, you decide decisively, you don't turn back, you don't walk backwards, and you have resilience, you show resilience, then you must receive a reward. The person who gives it all up for God will, 1,000% of the time, receive a reward. No one who has ever given their life to Christ and said, I will follow you no matter where it is, even if I can't see, even if it hurts, even if I lose people along the way. No person, Jesus told his disciples, there's not a person who has left land or house or family or friends who will not receive 100-fold in this life and in the next life, eternal. In the life eternal. And he says there's no one who does not receive the reward. The risk is there, yes. You will face challenges. You will face nights and pain where you say, man, I want to quit. Jeremiah said, I don't want to talk about God anymore. He said, I'm sick and tired of every time I speak the name of God to people, they just throw rocks at me. And he says, I can't stand it anymore. I don't want to quit. And then he said, but I couldn't. I had to go on. I needed to go on because his word was in me as a fire, it says. But no one loses their reward. Notice in verse 4, he says, he removed him into a land wherein now you dwell. Notice that's Stephen, where we started this whole lesson, this whole message. Stephen, the people, the council are sitting on the land that God had promised Abraham. The promise was fulfilled. And as Stephen stands before the council and recounts how the whole story got started, he's doing it on top of the vision that Abraham had thousands of years before. He's on the land of Canaan, the land of Israel that God gave them. He's standing on what happens. He's standing on the result of a man who sold out to God's vision for him. And as he speaks, though, notice that though Abraham in his life, it says he was very rich and he lived a good life. And I would love to say that that is going to be the result for everybody who sells out for God. And that's the result of everybody who chooses to do what I said tonight. But as Abraham increased and got rich in his life because he followed God, Stephen's end is very different. Look at Acts, look at the end of the chapter, verse 57 and 58. They cried out with a loud voice, they stopped their ears, and they ran upon him with one accord, and they cast him out of the city, and they stoned him. This was the response in his life of taking the risk. Go ahead and bow your heads, close your eyes as I finish this up. I cannot guarantee you the outcome of your journey with God. I don't know what it will look like. Some of you might be millionaires. One of you might become a billionaire. Some of you will own businesses. Some of you will work for other people. Some of you will live in comfortable houses. Some will just be faithful church members and become pillars of this church over here. Some of you might be missionaries. You may go to countries where you face hunger and famine and disease and even death for the name of Christ. I don't get to decide that. I don't know where it's going to go. And I wish I could tell you for 100% that your life sold out to Christ would be awesome in every respect. But there is risk. And I want to show you both sides of the coin. And the point is that a pioneer is not doing this for himself. He's clearing the way because he's generationally minded. He's clearing the path just for the chance that someone else could hear the name of Jesus. That's what Stephen did. He stood there with the choice. Should I cower and leave and save my life and preach tomorrow? Or should I preach today exactly what God's called me to preach? And in doing the riskier option, Stephen becomes a pioneer of his own in his own right, the first martyr of the church. And many would follow in his path. Many people from his point forward would die for their faith in Christ for no other reason but that the people behind them could have a shot at hearing the gospel. That was the reality he chose. That's the reality that all of us in here are enjoying the benefits of today. Somebody chose the riskier option. And that's why we sit here today with the gospel in our land, in our church, in our language, because someone else chose to do was not comfortable, not safe. So I'm going to ask you to come forward, everybody, and simply do this. Just thank God for the people who went before you. Come on, go ahead and come on. First of all, I want you just to simply thank God for the pioneers of your faith who went before you, who chose the riskier option so that you could hear the word of God.